Welcome, dear students. This is me, Dr. Ahmed Farid, Associate Professor of Anatomy and Embryology at Ain Shams University College of Medicine. And in this video, we will discuss the deep layer of the extensor compartment of the forearm, or deep layer of the posterior compartment of the forearm. In order to demonstrate first the muscles of the back of the forearm in the deep layer, we have to hide the muscles of the superficial layer. Let's look to this model and let's remember with each other that we have 7 superficial muscles in the back of the forearm. We have to hide them all to look to the deep group of the muscles of the back of the forearm. Let's start by the 3 muscles present on the radial side of the forearm, which are radialis muscles, brachioradialis, extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis. We will hide them now. Then we will go to the dorsal aspect of the forearm to hide the rest of our superficial muscles, extensor digitorum, extensor digiti minimi, and finally extensor carpi ulnaris with anconeus. So we have to hide all these muscles. Now look to the muscles of the deep layer of the back of the forearm. We want to memorize them easily, like what we did in the superficial group. How we can memorize them easily? I will start that I have a short muscle didn't reach or doesn't reach the carpal or metacarpal bones or phalanges, which is called supinator muscle, as you see. This supinator muscle, a muscle crossing behind the radio-ulnar joint, so it's called supinator. Okay? Then we have 3 muscles acting on the thumb, from above downwards and lateral to medial: abductor pollicis longus, reaching the first metacarpal bone, followed by extensor pollicis brevis, reaching the proximal phalanx of the thumb, and finally extensor pollicis longus, reaching the terminal phalanx of the thumb. Again, we have 3 muscles acting on the thumb: abductor pollicis longus, reaching the lateral side of the first metacarpal bone, extensor pollicis brevis, reaching the proximal phalanx of the thumb, and extensor pollicis longus, reaching the distal phalanx of the thumb. And finally, the last muscle is a muscle that is acting on the index finger only. It's called the extensor indicis muscle. Okay, so one more time to memorize the muscles of the deep layer of the back of the forearm. We have short muscle crossing horizontally behind the radio-ulnar joint called supinator. Then we have 3 muscles acting on the thumb for the 3 bones of the thumb: abductor pollicis longus to the first metacarpal bone, extensor pollicis brevis to the proximal phalanx, extensor pollicis longus to the distal phalanx of the thumb, and finally 1 muscle for the index called the extensor indicis. Now, as usual, we will take each muscle and we will demonstrate the attachments and the action of each of these muscles. Let's start by supinator muscle. Look to the muscle. It originates from the humerus and the ulna and going to wrap around the lateral aspect of the radius. So if we wanted to talk about its attachments, we will show the muscle like this. You will find that it takes origin from the lateral epicondyle of the humerus as superficial fibers, and these fibers will take origin from the supinator crest and supinator fossa of the ulna, going to be inserted into the lateral aspect of the radius after wrapping around the lateral aspect like this. Okay, so the action of this muscle, if you wanted to approximate the insertion to the origin, sure, it will rotate the radius like this. It will rotate the radius laterally like this on the radio-ulnar joint. So this action will be supination from the name of the muscle. It's called supinator muscle. Look to the model. This is the supinator muscle. Okay, will perform supination. And don't forget that all muscles performing supination and pronation, it's interestingly to know that they are attached to the radius. You have to revise the muscles involved in supination and pronation. You will find the insertions are all at the radius bone, because in supination and pronation the moving bone is the radius. So this is our first muscle, which is supinator performing supination. Okay. After supinator, we have three muscles for the thumb. The first of them is the abductor pollicis longus. Abductor pollicis longus. Abductor pollicis longus, as you see, takes origin from both back of radius and the ulna with the interosseous membrane, the posterior surface of ulna, in addition to posterior surface of radius, and it's going to be inserted into the lateral aspect of the metacarpal bone, the first metacarpal bone, or the lateral aspect of the metacarpal bone of the thumb. Okay? So, the next muscle is extensor pollicis brevis. As you see, extensor pollicis brevis takes origin from the posterior surface of the radius. Let's show the muscle. Posterior surface of the radius, in addition to back of the interosseous membrane, and because it's extensor pollicis and brevis, it reaches only the proximal phalanx of the thumb. So it's attached to the posterolateral aspect of the proximal phalanx of the thumb. And the third muscle is called extensor pollicis longus. As you see, extensor pollicis longus, this one. So it reaches the distal phalanx of the thumb as its name is longus. So extensor pollicis longus takes origin from, as you see, back of the ulna and maybe also back of the interosseous membrane, and going to be inserted into the posterolateral aspect of the distal phalanx of the thumb, because it's called the extensor pollicis longus. So let's look again to the three muscles collectively for the thumb. As you see, abductor pollicis longus from back of both radius and the ulna going to be inserted into the first metacarpal bone. Extensor pollicis brevis from back of radius going to the proximal phalanx of the thumb. Extensor pollicis longus from back of ulna going to the terminal phalanx of the thumb. If we wanted to talk about the actions of these muscles, let's start by abductor pollicis longus. Let's see its action. As this muscle crosses more or less lateral to the wrist joint, it will help in the radial deviation of the hand or abduction of the hand at the wrist joint. This is the muscle, which is the abductor pollicis longus, this one. It crosses lateral to the wrist joint, as you see, so it helps the radialis muscles in the radial deviation or abduction of the hand at the wrist joint. Another action, it will perform abduction and help in extension of the thumb. It will perform abduction and help in extension of the thumb. This is the muscle, and we look to it here, attached to the first metacarpal bone, as you see. So it performs abduction of the thumb from its name, abductor pollicis longus, and helps also in the extension of the thumb. Okay. Then we have the second muscle, which is extensor pollicis brevis. As you see, let's make a zoom. The extensor pollicis brevis reaching only the proximal phalanx of the thumb. Let's go to its actions. Again and again, as it passes just beside the abductor pollicis longus, lateral to the wrist joint, so it helps in the radial deviation of the hand at the wrist joint or abduction of the hand at the wrist joint, just like the abductor pollicis longus. And the other action is extension of the thumb. This is our muscle, but which joints of the thumb? It's very nice to know, and it's very logic to know that it's attached to the proximal phalanx of the thumb only, didn't reaching the distal phalanx, so it will extend the carpometacarpal and metacarpophalangeal joint of the thumb only, so it will perform extension of the metacarpal and proximal phalanx of the thumb. Then we'll go to the last muscle of the thumb, which is extensor pollicis longus, reaching to the distal phalanx. But look to this model, you will find abductor pollicis longus and extensor pollicis brevis crossing lateral to the wrist joint, so they help in radial deviation and abduction of the hand at the wrist joint. But as regard extensor pollicis longus, it takes a compartment posterior to the wrist joint, so its actions will be also abduction of the wrist and radial deviation of the hand, and may help in extension of the wrist. So this is our extensor pollicis longus. And as regard its extension to the thumb, it will extend all muscles of the thumb as it reaches, as you see, the distal phalanx of the thumb. So it will perform extension of all joints of the thumb. So to summarize, you will find that the three muscles acting on the thumb, which are abductor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis, extensor pollicis longus, are more or less similar in their action, with minute changes or minute differences between them according to the direction of the muscle in relation to the wrist joint, and also according to the destination of the muscle. Is it reaching only the metacarpal bone, or reaching the proximal phalanx, or reaching the distal phalanx? Our last muscle is the extensor indicis muscle, which is acting on the index finger. If I want to talk about its attachments, I will find it attached to the back of the ulna at the lower part of the shaft of the ulna, as you see, and also attached to the back of the interosseous membrane, and going to be inserted into the extensor expansion of the index finger. So its action will help in wrist extension, as you see, as it crosses behind the wrist joint. This is the extensor indicis in the deep aspect of the forearm. It's very nice to look. Okay. And another specific action, which is acting on the index finger, as it's attached to the extensor expansion of the index finger, it will be involved in the extension of the medial forefingers, and especially extension of all joints of the index finger. It's very clear from this animation that it forms extension of all joints of the index finger. Okay, so here we reached the end of our video talking about the deep layer of the back or extensor compartment of the forearm. Let's memorize them again. We have short horizontal muscle wrapping around the lateral aspect of the radius called supinator. Then we have three muscles acting on the thumb: abductor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis, followed by extensor pollicis longus. And finally, we have a muscle acting on the index finger called the extensor indicis muscle. Now we finished our video. I hope it's a beneficial video for all of you. Until we meet again in the upcoming videos, goodbye and good luck for you all.